So what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists. Let's see. And I'm hitting the down button. It's not forwarding. How come? Okay, here we go. So we have three, on the investment side, we have three individuals from various investment companies. We have Paul Grand, who's the founder and CEO of MedTech Innovator. We have Amy Cruz, who's the general partner in Prime Movers Lab, and Michael Thomas, who's the senior commercialization officer at InQtel. He's also the CEO and founder of Appian Medical. So just want to make sure all of our panelists are, can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do is if each of you will go in a roundtable fashion, each of you can, and we'll start first with Paul, Amy, then Mike. Tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about your firm, how startup CEOs can approach you, what your investment strategy is, and where where's your sweet spot, whether it's from seed through Series A or so forth. So we'll start with Paul, if you can give a little bit of background about MedTech Innovator and about yourself, and then we have 5 minutes each, and then we want to really focus on a lot of Q&A and discussion.
All right, and I was going to share a couple slides, but it says you need to enable sharing for me to do that. So if you want to do that, maybe somebody can give me a screen share ability. If not, I'll just
sure. Tim's going to switch over for a few slides.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just give a very quick intro on myself. I'm Paul Grand. I'm the CEO at MedTech Innovator. I was an entrepreneur before I got into venture capital and then started running our accelerator. So I started 8 different companies, some in the neuro space, and then made my way over to venture capital for 12 years, started MedTech Innovator in 2013 and been running it since then. We're the world's largest accelerator for medical technology. It's still saying that participant sharing is disabled. So I'll just wrap up with just another little. Oh, now I'm a co-host. Now I'm a co-host. Now I'm a co-host, so I can share. Okay, good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So just really quick. So MedTech Innovator is the world's largest accelerator for medtech. 9 years that we've been doing this. 422 alumni companies, many in the neuro space. 90 products on the market now from our alumni. They've gone on to raise over $3.4 billion in follow-on funding after MedTech Innovator. So very, very, very large and successful accelerator in the medtech space. We partner with some of the leading strategics from all over the world. And our mission is really just to bring these technologies to patients and with the maximum value possible. These aren't just sponsors. These are people who are mentoring all of our companies and actually guiding them through the process. Very quickly, our program runs all year long. It's everything from the application cycle, which is actually starting this week for MedTech Innovator, to our in-person road tour, where we invite hundreds of companies to pitch all of our partners in these group roundtables, where you get to get feedback from investors and clinicians and strategics and others in the industry. It's really about bringing the world's leading companies to the world's leading ecosystem. And I wanted to share one last slide, which is from a report that Deloitte just put out literally like 3 weeks ago, where they looked at the 1,000+ companies who applied to our US program this year. And they analyzed where those companies are in their stage, in their regulatory process, and so on. Really amazing insights. It's an amazing report, which you can find if you just go to Deloitte's website and just look up Deloitte MedTech Innovator, and you'll find the report. But the point is that a very interesting observation was that only 19% of the companies applying to MedTech Innovator are actually in a therapeutic device for treating something. 81% are doing something else. 81% of the companies applying are developing something for prevention, monitoring, keeping people healthy. So just as all of us are thinking about innovation, it's not just about treatment. And I wanted to leave us with that. So that's enough on me.
Great. Thank you so much. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about your firm?
Yeah, sure. I'll just give a few brief words about myself. neuroscientist, PhD by training, didn't go an academic path. Actually, I ended up moving out to Washington, D.C. and became a government program manager at DARPA. And I was there for 5 years and led a whole host of programs in what I called operational neuroscience. So trying to get neuroscience out of the lab and into the field. In that case, we meant the field. Sleep deprivation and high stress, decision-making, all that work. DARPA is term limited. So I stayed in the defense industry. After I left DARPA, actually went to a software company and helped build very high-end mission rehearsal and training systems that were based on gaming technology, and then got acquired by a much larger defense company, became their chief, Cubic Global Defense, became their chief technology officer. But more recently, I was a scientific co-founder at a startup called Optios. We're doing applied neuroscience for human performance, not in defense in that case, but in commercial. So executives, sports teams, financial traders, and cool folks looking for an edge with their brains. The two stories actually intersect. So Prime Movers Lab was actually the largest investor in our company from their fund one. And so that's how I got to meet the team back in 2018. And then when I left Optios last summer, a partner position opened up at Prime Movers Lab and really jumped at the chance. And I'll just say very briefly about the firm. We are a deep tech venture investing firm. We look for breakthrough science that has the potential to impact billions of lives, and we take that pretty seriously. So we have a lot of scientists and engineers on staff that not only help source and diligence the deals, but really lean in with the companies that join our portfolio and that work with us. We have a broad set of themes, so manufacturing, transportation, infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and my favorite, human augmentation, of course, which neuroscience and neuromodulation fits under quite well. So we have two funds right now. Fund 2, which is our early stage fund, seed plus, Series A type investments. $245 million fund. We tend to write $2 to $5 million first checks with the opportunity to follow on maybe a $10 to $20 million Series A if appropriate. We also have a growth fund. It's at about $450 million right now on its way to its $500 million cap. It's what I call B and beyond, and gives us the opportunity to either follow fund, companies that were in our earlier funds, or make new investments from that space for later stage companies, which really gives us a breadth of experience. And just one last thing I'll say about interacting with us as a firm. We are really conviction investors. We really lean in with the companies that we work with. So not only in terms of capital, but we have talent support, executive coaching, government relations, public relations, creative design, branding and marketing, a lot of ways that we really like to build a collaborative partnership with the portfolio companies that join us. And so really look forward to answering some questions today and also hearing from some CEOs. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Amy. And finally, Mike.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Mike Thomas here. I'm a senior commercialization advisor for InQtel. We basically manage the embedded entrepreneur program for DARPA. And it's a program where DARPA-funded companies get folks like me. They call them SEAs. We basically act like shadow CEOs to really help with commercialization challenges that some of the DARPA-funded companies would be facing or are facing. And we provide a $250,000 grant, so it's not an actual equity investment, to help hire the right talent and bring the right talent to some of these startups. My background, a little bit about me. I've been a venture capitalist. I was a partner in a $150 million corporate strategic fund at the Inova Health System in Northern Virginia. Made 24 investments, everything from fund-to-fund investing through pre-seed through Series B. But most of my career has been as a CEO. So I've been for 20 some odd years a CEO of multiple med tech, med device, digital health startups, several turnarounds, had 3 exits ranging from 3x to 80x, raised over 125 million in various forms of funding. So I've done everything from university spin-outs to internationally publicly traded companies. And prior to that was with Big Pharma. My background is in microbiology, not neuroscience, from Cornell. And that's me.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So I want to jump into a number of questions and really make this a dialogue. And I know I sent some questions in advance, and we'll certainly use some of those, but really wanted to expand it beyond just IPOs and M&A and looking at from seed and Series A, because that's really probably more relevant to a lot of the audience here. So let's start with, Paul and Amy, you make investments in that area. So when we look at how has the pandemic really impacted your investment appetite, the size of investments, the number of companies seeking investment, perhaps Paul, you can start. What have you noticed over the last year, and what do you see in 2022 in terms of the investment environment?
Well, what I'll do is I'll speak a little bit too, since we're not making direct investments in companies, but we are working with tons of companies. I'll just speak to kind of what we're seeing. So at MedTech Innovator, we've had 20 exits in our portfolio over 9 years, 10 of which have happened this year. So 50% of our exits have happened this year. And that path is increasing. We're seeing a ton of M&A activity in our portfolio. Part of it's because our portfolio is maturing, but just in general, there's a lot of M&A activity going on. And I'm hearing about IPO interest all the time. I just was talking to one of our portfolio companies the other day, and they're like, we're 2 years out, we're already on the path. And they're very serious about it. We all know the markets change, and that, markets could be radically different in 6 months, 3 months, a year from now. But as of right now, the outlook is looking pretty good. And even despite all these trends that you would think would indicate that things are going to get bad sometime soon, I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. So I'm pretty bullish and pretty excited. Again, we're seeing a ton of activity. We have all these strategic partners. They're very, very, very active right now in terms of M&A. So I'm expecting that to continue. There's a lot of cash out there and a lot of appetite. So that's what I'm seeing.
Great, Paul. Thank you. Amy, what have you noticed?
Yeah. So, maybe to some folks' surprise, I think the deal flow this year has been as high as sort of one could expect or hope for. Have just seen incredibly high quality seed stage companies, coming across our desk. Again, we're a bit broad, in terms of deep tech and breakthrough science, but probably, it's got to be at least a third of those were certainly in the biotech realm, and we haven't seen any sign of sort of that slowing down at all, which made for a very, very busy summer. One thing I will say is, we have seen larger seed rounds. I think one of the things that maybe the pandemic and maybe some uncertainty around the markets has done is encouraged people to either raise a larger seed round, or after raising their seed round, maybe raise that next round, whether that's a seed 2 or something else, very close on the heels of that. So I think the fundraising activity itself has been pretty robust, and you see people, I would say, maybe trying to stockpile some cash to cover for some uncertainties. And so that's certainly things that we've seen. Now, that said, we actually encourage companies to raise, sort of slightly larger seed rounds, because I think especially in the med tech device space, there are a lot of things that need contingencies, so don't shy away from larger seed rounds at all. So I hope that's helpful.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Mike, do you want to add to that as it perhaps relates to what you've seen with the companies in the program at DARPA, or any other?
Absolutely.
From your other experience?
Yes, I'd say we're seeing obviously robust activity for kind of across the board, both in neuro as well as all med tech, in terms of investor interest. And I'd say one of the things that's really interesting is that because the valuations are high and the market is flooded with cash right now and fantastic liquidity events, we're seeing actually a lot of interest from non-traditional funding or investors. So we're seeing some family offices, which traditionally are more private equity focused. They're branching out into venture capital, and they're even heading further earlier in the stage and doing some very early seed and Series A level investing. They don't necessarily have the due diligence capabilities that venture firms have, but we find them to be very strong follow-on or great investors to syndicate. So there's a lot of activity that's going on. So just for the folks in the audience, if don't just look at venture capital, there are a lot of other areas. You do want to make sure you're picking obviously the right level of investor that you're getting in bed with. So that's what we're
Great.
seeing.
Yeah, and let me just add one more point too. I gave the stat on M&A. In our portfolio, again, our companies over 9 years have raised $3.4 billion in follow-on funding, of which about 1.8 billion of that was this year. So again, it's a crazy year for funding. There's a ton of funding going on, and there's a lot of investor interest. And as Mike said, there's a lot of non-traditional investors who are investing in the space.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, Mike, I would say even some of the deals that we've seen this year have come from family offices that are our LPs, right? But have been watching some of these companies, maybe made an angel investment or something like that. And as they're getting ready to raise a larger round, they're bringing us deals, so I think that is becoming a really critical part in the ecosystem, in the funding ecosystem, for sure.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely democratizing, I think, the investment process, and it's allowing a lot of great technologies to get to the market faster. And just as Amy and Paul had mentioned, the quality of the companies that we're seeing that are coming across the transom are just fantastic. I will say, just as a caveat though, just because a company goes public and has a fantastic unicorn valuation, what I try to help a lot of our portfolio companies is to try to understand what milestones, what accomplishments have they achieved at that price point, the quality of the management team in place. I think a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, they get caught up in the buzz, and what they don't necessarily understand is that there is, unlike many other bubbles, there's a lot of substance here. We're seeing great companies, great management teams, technologies that can change the way medicine is practiced. But you have to make sure that you're following in a very high quality pathway that they had followed to. Just don't think it's, you start up a company, you can be a unicorn tomorrow.
Totally.
Sure. Next question. I want to talk a little bit about valuations at various stages. So first of all, how do you, there's quite a few entrepreneurs out here, and if you're seeking to raise some money, how do you know whether you're either pre-seed or seed, number one, or even Series A? And over the last year, what have you seen in terms of investments amounts at those three stages and valuations, if a valuation has been set, or alternative, whether they're going after safes, for those familiar with that vehicle, or a convertible note? So Paul, let's start with you a little bit in terms of how do I know if I'm a pre-seed, seed, or Series A if I'm raising money? What valuations and how much am I typically raising?
That is a great question. And I was going to pull up some stats because I actually have some stats on that, but I got to go find it. So I'll look while we're talking on the amounts, but we actually we did an analysis of the average Series A, the average seed round, and so on. So I'll pull those stats up in a minute and I'll give you those stats after the other speakers speak. But I will say this, that the comps are really important, that there are some investors that are only seed investors, only Series A or later investors, and so on. And even though they might love you, they might just say, hey, we're seed, we're Series A, and so on. And the classification does matter to them, but most of them aren't in that camp. Most of them will say, hey, yes, we generally do Series A and later, but if we found a great opportunity, or an entrepreneur who we've worked with before, we'll still invest at the seed round, even though typically we do an A. I see those all the time. So, we don't want to get lost too much in the naming, but I will say that the rounds have gotten, it's like the new, what do we say, like the new, the seed, today's seed round is yesterday's Series A, right? Much bigger seed rounds than we've ever seen before. And also a really surprising fact that I will put out there, and then I'll pull up my data while the other speakers speak, is that 66% of the companies doing a Series A were already clinical in stage, of the 1,000 plus that we looked at this year, already clinical in stage at the Series A, which when I was a VC in the beginning of my career, Series A was like, we were just getting started. And they had barely done a prototype and were, figuring out their technology. Now Series A is you're already clinical. So that's a completely different world. I'll let the others chime in and I'll go pull up some data.
I was just going to say a few words around the round naming, round size, check size. We tend to think about it in terms of the check size we're writing, right? So if we're writing something in the $2 to $5 million range, for us, that's like a seed plus, what a seed two, whatever you want to call it. Like, but now there's like 42, rounds of seed. If we're writing, a 10, 15, $20 million check, to us, that's a core position, a Series A type investment. I would absolutely agree. I think we've seen across the board, even across the year, the size of A rounds has upsized. I do think, there is some challenge around valuation there. And some folks, some investors may be less valuation or price sensitive. Some folks may be more so, and really trying to, to communicate to the CEOs and the portfolio companies around our expectations around valuation, how we build that, our thought process around there. From an entrepreneurial perspective, you might think, oh, I want the biggest valuation possible, right? But you also might set yourself up for a down round, or depending on what stage you're at. So I think it really is a balance between, stage of maturity of the company, what you've demonstrated, not just technical milestones, but those inflection points that we look for, when we're thinking about investing, and then how much money you need. It all comes together. So it's still a bit of an art, I think, but have seen all numbers go up over the past year. So.
And Amy, for your investments, how are you? First of all, in the $2 to $5 million seed range, are you seeing a lot in medical devices? Number one, and number two is, how are you structuring those investments in general? Is it at a set valuation?
Oh, sure. Thanks for following up. We're actually, I'm seeing pretty broad neurotech in general. It's almost maybe 50-50 in terms of, things that are very clinically focused, think, indication, clinically focused, also seeing a lot in the, let's call it maybe general wellness category in neurotech now. So a lot of that has been coming across our desk. We tend to avoid doing investments into safe notes as our first investment. So if we're writing a $2 to $5 million check, even if it's a small round, we tend to want to do, a priced round at that stage, and move forward from there. I know there's a lot of pre-seed activity that's happening in notes and other things now, which I think is great and fine. We just tend to enter, that first stage at a price seed round.
Sure. And Amy, finally, can you just, because the SAFE instrument is relatively new, and probably a lot of the audience isn't familiar with simple agreements for future equity. Can you just give a quick summary of what that is?
Yeah. It was essentially started by the Y Combinator folks, right? Designed to be a little bit faster and easier to use than, the sort of more formal or structured convertible note, because we sort of see people using them, almost interchangeably at this point, just depending on sometimes what their lawyers recommend, or maybe what a founder had used before. So it's just a little bit more of a streamlined, perhaps less lawyerly process. You can still do discounts. You can still do caps. I've seen a lot of uncapped notes this year. I've also seen, some with caps, but those tend to be on bridge rounds or follow-on rounds. So,
great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. Mike, final comments on this question?
Yeah, I'd say we're seeing obviously some very inflated valuations coming through on our portfolio, and one of the things that we try to help our entrepreneurs and CEOs with is really to understand not to be too aggressive. Everybody wants to have a very high valuation and minimize dilution, but it also prices it in for perfection. And having done the CEO route for so many decades, I can tell you, you could do everything right, and then if the market has a little bit of a setback, the general market or the economy, you're going to be in a down round that's going to be very frustrating for your investors. So, and also realize too that investors are adept at being able to have a sliding scale. If your valuation gets a little high, there's another way. There are other ways for them to be able to kind of work the deal structure. So it shouldn't always be about the valuation. It should be about the total deal itself. And you really do want to make sure that if folks are really bidding up the valuation, maybe above market, that should be cause for some concern. You want to be careful with that because they might not be the best investors for you, on your stage. That would
Great
be
points.
great.
Paul, I
Yeah,
know
and-
you were looking for that data. I don't know if you wanted to. Oh, there
Yeah,
you go.
yeah, here
Perfect.
you go. I just shared the screen. I'm zooming in so you can see this, the important part over here. But average round size for pre-seed was 0.25 million. Seed was 1.3 million. Series A was 4.85 million. And the average seed stage company has 6 months of funding before it runs out of cash. So for people who want to jot that down, again, there are larger Series A's. We have an $8 million one happening right now, but the average across 1,000 plus
Great.
companies are what you see here.
Oh, very, very helpful. One more question before we open it up to the audience, and then we can always circle back if there's time. When you look at implantable versus non-invasive neuromodulation devices, when you look at the valuations, Inspire, publicly traded, I don't know, $7 billion, Exonics, a few $1 billion, exits of Cyberonics in the early, long time ago, 1.1 or so $billion. And then you go over to the relatively new sector, but the wearable or non-invasive neuromodulation devices, most notably electrocore, raised an astounding $200 million, about a little more than a third for their IPO. And their market cap, although it hit $250 million at one point, I don't know what it is today, but say hovering around 70 million. And you have a whole new other wearable devices coming to the market. Yet we don't see any of the big valuations. Is that because it's a relatively new sector and the revenues really haven't penetrated the market yet? Electrocore, the last quarter was maybe 1.1 million in revenues. You have some exciting devices like Theronica for headache and so forth, but those are privately held. Can you comment about the wearables and why aren't we seeing, because a lot of folks in this community are coming to the market with non-invasive neuromodulation devices. Where are the values and what should we expect? So Paul, we'll go in the same circle. Paul, why don't you start?
All right, good. So so I think it is. I think revenue is the big driver here, right? So we're not seeing the revenues that I think we'd love to see that would drive some really healthy multiples, and that's part of people still figuring out the business model and reimbursement. Payment remains the biggest obstacle for these types of technologies. We're moving care from the hospital to the home. And yet the pricing model hasn't kept up with it. So I think that's a big driver here. And again, overall across the market, you didn't talk about companies like NeuroPace or CVRX and others. Like the market isn't rewarding people with the kind of valuations that we would expect them to see. These are companies down from their IPO, even though they offer a huge amount of value. So I think the medtech space just doesn't get the credit it deserves, frankly, in many cases. And we see companies constantly trying to reposition themselves as a digital company and saying, oh, we're a digital health company, even though they're a device company, and we would have all called them device companies for years. They're a digital health company. I mean, even what was the one I was just reading about? There was the company Papa or whatever that does like care providers who take for social determinants of health kind of technologies. If you want to look at it that way, they're basically just finding somebody to take your mom to get her groceries or your dad to his doctor's appointment and making sure they take their pills. That we would have said like, oh, that's like a caregiving, whatever company. They're a digital health company. They're like, multi-billion-dollar digital health unicorn. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying everyone's trying to call themselves digital health because that really helps. That's where you get these huge, 20x, 30x, whatever multiples. And the med tech companies aren't seeing anything even close to that. So to me, that's the big driver here is a lack of really established payment and revenues, and med tech just not getting the respect it deserves.
So you really want it to be a digital health with an AI component is what you're saying, Paul, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think people are a little bit over AI in terms of like AI itself is not the driver. In fact, if you don't have AI, I think that's really more the telling thing that people are like, oh, you don't have AI. And that's a problem. Like 80% of the companies that identify as digital have AI and clinical decision support and all that stuff in their stack now. So you have to have AI.
Interesting. Amy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna make one comment, certainly echoing what Paul said. And this is something that we've been looking at as we look at companies that are exiting through SPACs and other mechanisms. It's all about, like, I mean, in addition to actually figuring out the revenue model and the business model, right? It's actually about coverage in terms of where they're at on the public markets, who's paying attention to those stocks. If you look at some of the stocks, their trading volume is like tiny, right? And so I do think there's something that needs to happen here in the med device space, in the neuromodulation space, whether it's invasive or wearables or whatever, need to get that information and coverage out there from the analysts and the public markets and the way they're looking at it to actually get some trading volume here, right? So that these, they can actually kind of enter the market at much more great numbers, but also stay robust enough to to keep trading. A lot of you asked a question earlier, in our pre-chat around SPACs and things like that. And the problem has been, like, you can get the SPAC, but the pipe falls apart, the private investment in public equity falls apart, or there's a lot of redemption. So there's just a lot of squishiness in the market yet. And I think we need just stronger coverage and stronger communication on neurotech and neuromod in general in the public markets.
Great points. And
Yeah.
Mike, final word before we shift over to the audience questions.
Sure, yeah, I thought Paul and Amy hit it right on the head. I'd say, from besides the reimbursement and medical policy challenges, as well as revenue ramp, the reason why you don't obviously get, in many cases, the digital health multiples is because med device doesn't tend to be as scalable as just software or software with AI. And I think defining clinical utility is something that still is a lost art in medtech, and I don't think medtech has done the best job that it can in terms of having well-defined clinical utility understood by payers, by physicians, by patients, whomever. So I think that there's folks think about revenue ramp and FDA and reimbursement, but clinical utility is a big missing piece in many of these places. And the ones that are most successful have extremely well-defined utility and the payers understand the benefits.
Great, thanks, Mike. Very insightful comments. Thank you, everyone. Let's turn the audience for audience questions. Jim's, I guess you get to ask the first question.
Jim always gets
Let
first
me know if I need to repeat
Jim
it.
does, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to unmute.
Let's see if this works. And
There you go.
turn
Yeah,
the
we can
speaker
hear you.
off. Any feedback? Good. This is working. First of all, before I ask my question, I want to make a clarification. Paul Grand left something out of your bio, which we apologize for. Paul Grand, very modest, in addition to having been on the VC side, in addition to all his accomplishments at MedTech Innovator, Paul Grand was a previous recipient of the Neurotech Report's Gold Electrode Award, or at least he thinks he is. Unfortunately, never got delivered to him because it's so valuable. We put a lot of money into those paper certificates, Paul. So you'll understand why we didn't trust the mail with sending that to you. But one of these days we're going to meet in person and we're going to hand deliver that Gold Electrode Award.
I'll put it up on my wall back here. Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, it's up on your wall. Yeah.
I'll put it up there. That'll
Okay,
be on
so-
my monitor next time.
The question I was going to ask, when you were a VC back at RCT, you were one of the original investors in StimWave, and I think I remember we had a discussion about that. It was a little bit of a risky investment. They were making some claims, and I'm just curious. And I know it was a while ago, but I'm curious if you could share with us, because we talked about the StimWave lawsuit. I don't know if you were sitting in on my talk this morning, but I was wondering if you could just share with us your impressions initially of the StimWave technology and the StimWave management, and also any impression that you might have more recently.
Sure. Well, I don't have the context for your discussion, so I'm not up to date on the StimWave lawsuit or any of that. So that's all news to me. I'd love to know what's going on there. So I'm gonna have to look up the news. But going back to the history, just real quick. StimWave was one of those companies when we saw it, as I think you and I have talked about in the past. that, had a really, really compelling opportunity, and that you could just do injectable stimulators, and just the promise of doing that with, their own, like they had an interesting anchoring solution, but ultimately it was just the ability to put tons of these things. And like we saw a future where maybe you'd have an array of these injectable stimulators in the body. And you could turn them on for different diseases at different times. And, there was a lot of promise and excitement around that. And then they spun off I think they kind of separated into lots of different structures. We only participated at RCT in a note that was part of the time when Laura, as the CEO, was trying to figure out the best way to structure the company. And we said, hey, we'll give you a little bit of money to kind of keep things going while you figure that out. And it was, do we separate this into 4 entities or 3 entities or 1 entity? And how are we going to do this? And ultimately, RCT did not participate in the follow-on, in the funding. We just did the note that converted into the round. And so we didn't participate in the later funding. But at the time, I was a super fan of what they were doing conceptually. And I thought that they had a lot of, momentum behind what they were doing, but they were very early with an inexperienced team. And that was, I think, one of the fundamental things for us that we just really weren't sure about. I think internally was, is this the right team? And ultimately, we all bet on teams. And it wasn't that we didn't like Laura and her team. We did, but we just weren't sure at the time, I think. And that was probably one of the big decision points around it, to not do that Series A. We just weren't sure. And I think a lot of us sat around and were like, this is going to be, as many medtech things are, binary, where we said this is either going to be a massive opportunity and it's going to be incredible, or it's going to be worth very little. And we just said that was really the way we saw it. And we're like, this is either going to be incredible or not. So that's the best color I can provide you on that particular opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Paul, for that update. I'll send you a copy of our most recent coverage of the StimWave. They're actually doing well. They have new management, obviously. They were at the NANS mid-year meeting in Orlando presenting. So I think the company's going to probably emerge, but I'll send you the coverage we did in Neurotech Business Report most recently. Thank you.
Great. Let's take one more question from the audience, and then we'll go see who's online. Yeah, please.
So this question is directed to Paul. You said your analysis of the companies that have applied to your program, only 19% are therapeutics. And if you look with the value that's been generated by your portfolio companies, value creation, when you look at the bigger picture, the value creation, has it come around mainly therapeutics, or has it come a lot of other spaces? And I want to kind of bring it towards all the early entrepreneurs who are putting their heart and soul into their companies. Should they be more focused on a therapeutic application, or is there value creation that's happened in non-therapeutics?
Yeah, so I'll say this. There's absolutely value creation that's happened in both the therapeutic and the non-therapeutic portions of these companies. What I think the message that I wanted to give to everybody is that that we're not just in an acute therapeutic world anymore, and that the episode of care is really the important thing. And it's everything from prevention in the first place to monitoring people post-acute, and that the data and the digital and all this stuff is really where the innovation is, where the opportunity is, where the payers want to be, where the patients want. We don't want to be patients, right? We want to be well. So I think, that's where the puck is going. I think that's where we all need to focus. And it doesn't mean that if you're in the audience with an early stage neuromodulation technology that's going to stimulate and treat something, that you should be changing your model. It's just, you should be thinking bigger. You should be about the overall larger ecosystem. If you talk to a Cala Health, or you talk to companies in this space, they're not just talking about treating tremor or whatever the device does. They're talking about data and an overall patient journey and all those things. And all of us need to be thinking that way. It's not just about the device. So that's what I would say in response to the question. There's plenty of value in both areas. But as I mentioned earlier, from a valuation standpoint, the more you're emphasizing the digital, the data, we're with this patient for, if you have an implant or something non-invasive or not, and you can follow that patient and generate data over time, you're going to be more valuable. There's no question about it.
Great. We can take one more question from the audience. Andrew.
Thank you for all the great information you guys are providing. One question of mine is, over the past 15 years, there's been the emergence of a lot of non-dilutive funding from US and other agencies to help get early stage companies pretty far down the field. How do you guys deal, or how do you approach a company that comes out of maybe an early feasibility trial, having no history of funding from venture capitalists, and looking at kind of the traditional map that they take with going from pre-seed to seed and so on and so forth? They don't have any of that history. How do you approach them when they're kind of coming out of the pipe at a different state than you might typically see in a kind of common path?
So I would say, one of the key things that we try to get across to, so all of our companies are obviously DARPA funded. Is the point we try to make is that you really have to use a non-dilutive funding to achieve value creating milestones. Many times when I was a partner at the Innova Health System, we would have companies brag about, hey, we've had $30 million non-dilutive funding. And I'd scratch my head and think, well, okay, why are you still at, the extremely early stages of development here? You should have been much farther along. So I would say first and foremost, make sure that you're achieving something and further de-risking it from the investor's perspective. But Amy and Paul could probably better explain how they might view it for funding rounds.
Yeah, no, I would just echo that I think I mentioned it earlier. I do think that sometimes the non-dilutive funding can be very focused on technical milestones. And I think what you have to look at when you look at value creation and maybe entering that venture capital market is we don't just look at technical milestones, right? We look at inflection points, we look at the team, we look at, and so there are some business elements that may not be entirely addressed by the non-dilutive funding. And I know that's one of the reasons why Mike is there, right? To help some of these, help companies that may have come from that more academic or non-dilutive path. And so that's all I would say, is that we look at it a bit more holistically. Obviously, there's a large technical component to it because we're deep tech investors, but we look at the deal and the team and the business model and all those things, sort of equivalently, like in a big basket. And so that's what I'd say. It's not like it's harder to do. It's just like you have to get up to speed perhaps on some other elements that may not have been the focus of that non-dilutive funding.
Great, thank you. We are running out of time, so I just want to leave with one additional question, but thank you, Paul, Amy, and Mike, really valuable insights. And the final question really is, any final comments that you wanted to make? And if you've caught the attention of several of the CEOs and entrepreneurs here in the room, how do they approach you? So Paul, why don't you start, and then Amy and Mike.
Hey, thanks. This is a fun panel. Good discussion. Thank you, guys. Fun with you, Mike and Amy, and of course, Jeff. So I would say that MedTech Innovator is for everyone. It doesn't matter what stage you're at. If you're in the audience, unless you're a public company, I'd encourage you to apply to MedTech Innovator, because it is an amazing opportunity to get feedback at various levels from people who normally don't give you feedback. So MedTech Innovator is just opening our applications for 2022 right now. You could just go to medtechinnovator.org/apply, and that will take you to our page. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. I'm very open and open to communication. So reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to talk to anybody about your technology or what you're up to. We're very competitive, 4% acceptance rate, but it's worth applying. Trust me. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.
Excellent. Yeah,
Thank you, Paul.
great. Thanks. Thanks for being such a good source of awesome deals, Paul. We appreciate that. Yeah. So, from our perspective, email and LinkedIn and other sources are super easy. We're all really easy to get a hold of at Prime Movers Lab, and make it a point to really connect with CEOs and founders that contact us. So just reach out to me directly, and love to chat.
And for me, I'd say same thing. LinkedIn is usually the best way to get a hold of me. So yeah, go ahead and send a message or connect. Happy to chat.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your time and insights, and I'm going to bring it back to Jim.